Chapter 4. All knowledge of measuring time had escaped Grigner. When a person is deprived of the sun, they wrote deprived first and then corrected it to an R. When a person is deprived of the sun, moon, and stars, he loses all conception of time as he had previously understood it. That's actually true. It's been experimentally demonstrated that if you don't have any external references to time, then you can't track it anymore. Your sleep cycle gets messed up. It seemed as if years had passed, if time was being measured by terms of misery and mental anguish. Yet he estimated that his stay had only been a few days in length. He has slept 3 times and had been fed 5 times since his awakening in the crypt. Nice mixed tenses there. I assume that was simply a typo, because up to now the tense has actually been pretty good. It hasn't been inconsistent like that before. Although there might have been a few times where they used present tense instead of past tense, but I don't recall any. However, when the actions of a body are restricted, its needs are also affected. The need for nourishment and slumber are directly proportional to the functions the body has performed, meaning that when free and active, Grigner may become hungry every 6 hours and witness the desire for sleep every 15 hours. Whereas in his present condition, he may encounter the need for food every 10 hours and the want for rest every 20 hours. All methods he had before depended upon were extinct in the dismal pit. Hence, he may have been imprisoned for 10 minutes or 10 years. He did not know, resulting in a disheartened emotion deep within his being. The food, if you can honor the moldering lumps of fetid mush to that extent, was borne to him by 2 guards who opened a portal at the top of his enclosure and shoved it to him in wooden bowls, retrieving the food and water bowels. Water bowels? I have to start over. And by the way, they misspelled born. In this context, it should have an E at the end. The food, if you can honor the moldering lumps of fetid mush to that extent, was borne to him by 2 guards, who opened a portal at the top of his enclosure and shoved it to him in wooden bowls, retrieving the food and water bowels from his previous meal at the same time, after which they threw back the bolts on the iron latch and returned to their other duties. Since deprived of all other means of nourishment, Grigner was impelled to eat the tainted slop in order to ward off the pangs of starvation, though as he stuffed it into his mouth with his filthy fingers and struggled to force it down his throat, he imagined it was that which had been spurned by the hounds stationed at various segments of the palace. There was little in the barren vault that could occupy his body or mind. He had paced out the length and width of the enclosure time and time again, and tested every granite slab which consisted the walls of the prison in hopes of finding a hidden passage to freedom, all of which was to no avail other than to keep him busy and distract his mind from wandering to thoughts of what he believed was his future. Consisted the walls. Comprised the walls? That would make sense. Composed the walls. Yes, the walls comprised granite slab, so they were composed of granite slab. So the granite slab composed the walls, but that still wouldn't be a good usage for that. So that's fun. He had memorized the number of strides from one end to the other of the cell, and knew the exact number of slabs which made up the bleak dungeon. Numerous schemes were introduced and alternately discarded in turn, as they succeeded to unravel to him no means of escape which stood the slightest chance of success. Anguish continued to mount as his means of occupation were rapidly exhausted. Why would they put the hyphen break there? Why would they put it there? I don't understand. I don't understand. Suddenly, without notive, he was-routed from his contemplations as he detected a faint scratching sound at the end of the crypt opposite him. So I'm pretty sure they meant without notice, and not only did they misspell it, typing V instead of C, but they also put a space between the O and the T for whatever strange reason. The sound seemed to be caused by something trying to scrape away at the granite blocks the floor of the enclosure consisted of, the sandy scratching of something like an animal's claws. Grigner gradually groped his way to the other end of the vault, carefully feeling his way along with his hands ahead of him. When a few inches from the wall, a loud penetrating squeal and the scampering of small padded feet reverberated from the walls of the roughly hewn chamber. Grigner threw his hands up to shield his face and flung himself backwards upon his buttocks. A fuzzy form bounded to his hairy chest, burying its talons in his flesh while gnashing towards his throat with its grinding white teeth, its sour, fetid breath, scorching the skirming barbarian's dilating nostrils. I feel like I must be getting used to all these misspellings because they barely even make me blink anymore. I just expect it now. Grigner grappled with the lashing flexor muscles of the repugnant body of a gargantuan brown-hided rat, striving to hold its razor teeth from his juicy jugular, as its beady gray organs of sight glazed into the flaring emeralds of its prey. Its beady gray organs of sight, that's even worse, or better, depending on your perspective, than emerald green orbs. Beady gray organs of sight, that's a frickin' new one. How many ways can he come up with to describe eyes? We may never know. A mystery for the ages. Also, I'm gonna look up flexor muscles. A muscle whose contraction acts to bend a joint or limb. So basically when you bend your arm, you're using a flexor muscle. So it could really mean a lot of different muscles. Why would he specify flexor muscles? In fact, why would he describe him as grappling with the rat's muscles specifically? He's just grappling with the rat. Why didn't he say he's grappling with his muscles, let alone his flexor muscles specifically? Taking hold of the rodent around its lean, growling stomach with both hands, Grigner pried it from his crimson rent breast, removing small patches of flayed flesh from his chest in the motion between the squalid black claws of the starving beast. Okay, I need to unpack that sentence. So I don't know what he means by rent breast. Maybe rent has a meaning that I'm not aware of, like as a verb. Like I know that rent can mean like to rend something open. Okay, so he probably means his torn open chest. Okay, so it's saying that he tore the rat off of his chest, and that in doing so, the rat's claws removed some of his flesh from his chest. Okay, cool. That was, a really complex way of saying that, but whatever. Holding the rodent at arm's length, he cupped his right hand over its frothing face, contracting his fingers into a vice-like fist over the quivering head. Retaining his grips on the rat, Grigner flexed his outstretched arms, while slowly twisting his right hand clockwise and his left hand counterclockwise motion. The rodent let out a tortured squall, drawing scarlet as it violently dug its foam-flecked fangs into the barbarian's sweating palm, causing his face to contort to an ugly grimace as he cursed beneath his breath. As he cursed beneath his breath. His breath. With a loud crack, the rodent's head parted from its squirming torso, sending out a sprinkling shower of crimson gore, and trailing a slimy string of disjointed vertebrae, snapped trachea, esophagus, and jugular, disjointed hyoid bone, morose purpled stretched hide, and blood-seared muscles. That is so specific. Like, was the author really keen on biology when he wrote this? Judging by the fact that he specified flexor muscles earlier, I'm starting to think so. Maybe he was in the middle of taking a biology class when he wrote this. Also, I'm glad that this paragraph contained a misspelling of sprinkling as sprinking, because there was the same misspelling earlier in the story, but the digital transcription I was reading had accidentally corrected it to sprinkling, and so we did not get to enjoy it. But it has returned to grace us again with its presence, so I'm pretty happy about that. Flinging the broken body to the floor, Grigner shook his blood-streaked hands and wiped them against his thigh until dry, then wiped the blood that had showered his face and from his eyes. Again sitting himself upon the jagged floor, he prepared to once more revamp his glum meditations. He told himself that as long as he still breathed the gust of life through his lungs, hope was not lost. He told himself this, but found it hard to comprehend in his gloomy surroundings. Yet he was still alive, his bulging sinews at their peak of marvel, his struggling mind floating in a myral? When I look up myral in my dictionary, the result is a 2010 biographical political film about the coming of age of a Palestinian girl named Muriel. And I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but that's what comes up when I look up myral in my dictionary. If I look it up in Wiktionary with 2 L's, the result is a Catalan word for mirror. Myral. I don't... I'm completely stumped. This is the first time that I've had absolutely no idea what he is supposed to mean. Well, I'm going to reread the sentence because I disrupted it for so long. Yet he was still alive, his bulging sinews at their peak of marvel, his struggling mind floating in a myral of impressed excellence of thought. Plot after plot sifted through his mind in energetic contemplations. Then it hit him. Minutes may have passed in silent thought, or days, he could not tell, but he stumbled at last upon a plan that he considered as holding a slight margin of plausibility. He might die in the attempt, but he knew he would not submit without a final bloody struggle. It was not a foolproof plan, yet it built up a store of renewed vortexed energy in his overwrought soul. Though he might perish in the execution of the escape, he would still be escaping the life of infinite torture in store for him. Either way, he would still cheat the gloating prince of the suck-sword revenge his sadistic mind craved so dearly. I always thought that word was pronounced sucksor, but I looked it up in the dictionary, and apparently it's pronounced succor, which seems like a really weird way to pronounce it. And, that explains why nobody ever says it out loud. Actually, in fact, the American English Dictionary doesn't even give the pronunciation as succor, it gives it as sucker. Yeah, so I'm extra not surprised that nobody ever says it out loud if that's how it's supposed to be pronounced. So, yeah, I've been pronouncing it wrong, so I'm going to reread that sentence, and I'm also going to reread an earlier sentence that contained that word. Either way, he would still cheat the gloating prince of the succored revenge his sadistic mind craved so dearly. The guards would soon come to bear him off to the prince's buried mines of dread, giving him the sought-after opportunity to execute his newly formulated plan. Groping his way along the rough floor, Grigner finally found his tool in a pool of congealed gore. The carcass of the decapitated rodent. The tool that the very filth he had been sentenced to spawned. What? Oh. The filth he had been sentenced to spawned this tool, which is the decapitated rodent. I understand now. When the time came for action, he would have to be prepared, so he set himself to rending the sticky hulk in grim silence, searching by the touch of his fingertips for the lever to freedom. Gross. Also, that really isn't the right usage for the word hulk.